Yeah. Really hate that every single time.
Yep.
The number of times that I've had to play that over the past 5 years, and every single time I'm like, is it okay if I start recording? And it does that. The same voice. They have not changed it. Nobody at Zoom has changed that voice for the past 5 years. And I think if there was a suggestion I had for their development team, it'd be to change the voice of their recording in progress gal.
Well, there's lots of issues around changing the voice.
Lots of issues, and I'm sure there are plenty of people that love it. So we won't even go down that rabbit hole. But I really do appreciate you hopping on and joining me tonight. And I know it's there's a lot of catch up to be done here. It has been roughly 5.5-ish, 6 years since the last time we connected at the Citadel. But just to kind of start, if you wouldn't mind giving a little bit of background on what you are currently working on and also your role at the Citadel.
Sure. So I guess currently I am an associate professor in the Zucker Family School of Education and still director of the STEM Center. Which means we do a lot with K-12 students and teachers throughout the state of South Carolina, primarily in the Low Country, but really across the state. Still also the sponsor for the Sustainability Club on campus. We're still very much grant funded, and a lot of those grants center around computer science and computational thinking. And then a lot of our activities center around trying to bring students into STEM. So we still have Storm the Citadel and several other activities that are trying to expose more students to STEM.
Great. For the Sustainability Club, which I just kind of dive into that a little bit more, it is more specifically a hydroponic and aeroponic containers now, multiple on campus?
They'll just have the one.
Okay. And you've been doing that for how long now with the school?
I think we got our first container 2017, I think. Maybe 2016, definitely by 2017. So a long time.
Yeah, it was 2018. So I believe it was a year and a half before I graduated. It might have been 2 years.
So maybe late 2016.
Okay. And are you growing anything different? Or are you still growing the same products? And maybe just a little bit of background on what the containers do altogether.
Yeah, so we started out growing lettuce. Part of the reason was most of the lettuce that Americans eat has been shipped at least 5 days away. So it's not something that we get fresh. So we were trying to provide fresh greens to campus. We grow much more than lettuce now. We've experimented with all sorts of different things. We've tried peppers, we've tried cucumbers, we've tried strawberries, we've tried pretty much everything you can possibly think of. Herbs grow really well. Every December, we have a giving of the greens. So we open up the container to faculty and staff on campus and let them come grab whatever they want. I've actually taught a class, a strand class in connection with the container, and let the students pick whatever they wanted to grow. And I've had several students do some of their senior projects or other projects in the container, kind of trying to figure out different problems. So it's different every year a little bit, still going strong. We've discussed expanding it, but haven't quite gotten to a place where we can do that yet. Although Amplified Ag, which is now the umbrella company for Tiger Corner Farms, has even offered to lease us a container. So just haven't quite gotten to the point where we can do that yet.
It's super cool. The strawberries, that piece of it, strawberries, I know you mentioned herbs being pretty easy to grow. How did the strawberry growing process work out?
We failed epically.
I just to think about growing like fruits in the container. I've seen a lot since graduating too, from the herbs to the lettuces to the mushrooms. I mean, honestly, frankly, obviously you can grow just about anything, but fruits have to be super difficult. So why is it that fruits are more difficult than the leafy greens?
I mean, it depends on which one. So strawberries are just really notoriously hard to grow, especially from seed. So we tried seeds. We didn't get anything to sprout. We tried starting with little sprouts and didn't get anything from there really to grow. Tomatoes grow awesome. Cucumbers grow awesome. Peas grow awesome. We just had to figure out some way to trellis them, which has been really fascinating in a confined space. So it depends on we've grown watermelon that turned out really neat. They were just little baby watermelons. We've grown different types of peppers. Tomatoes work really well. We get those small, little teeny tiny tomatoes that are really good.
Right.
And then the cucumbers just kind of grow across the ground or the lights, depending on.
I was about to say, where are they growing in the shipping container?
Right. So those work really well too. It's interesting because, with fruits, there's nothing really to pollinate them.
Right.
So, it's interesting to see them grow just with the fans going, to move things around.
So for those that might not be kind of aware of how this process works too, from going from the hydroponics into the aeroponics, that is still the setup, correct? It's a mixture. Okay. Can you talk about like the nutrients and how they're fed to the plants? Because I think a lot of people now still, especially with the stuff they see online, think, oh my gosh, they're growing food in basically a lab. There's no way it's healthy or good for us. It's got to be synthetic. It's got to be fake. There's got to be a bunch of preservatives in it. But obviously, in the contrary, it's actually all very real, very natural. So if you could just give a little more support to that.
Yeah. So we start everything with little pods that are made out of coconut husks. So they're coconut husks that have been shredded and put together in a form with organic glue. So they're compostable, they're completely organic. And we put those into a tray and then the seeds go in depending on what we want to grow. And depending on who's doing the seeding, sometimes they keep better track of those seeds than others. And sometimes it's a complete surprise as to what we grow. But every seed has a different germination rate. So once we get the seeds into the pods, in the trays, they sit in kind of a tray of water. And the tray fills once a day for about 15 minutes just to get those pods wet. The coconut husk retains quite a bit of water. So they stay there usually a week to 2 weeks, depending on what the germination rate for that particular plant is. So we try to get them to maybe an inch tall. And that way they have enough of a root structure to be able to go into the aeroponic portion. Because the aeroponic portion is it sprinkles water down the center of 2 panels. So the seeds in the pods go into the walls and then it basically rains on the inside on the roots. So if they don't have much of a root system, it's harder for them to grow. But each system is separate and has its own tank, and each of those tanks is dosed with nutrients. So nutrients that you would naturally either get from the soil or treat the soil with. So things like, nitrogen is super important for plants. Calcium, all of those, basically anything that the soil would naturally have, we have to just add to the water.
Anything that's not in my front yard, because right now I don't have any grass. So anything
right.
that things actually need in order to grow, which is obviously not in my front yard right now. So that's, that's a work in progress, by the way. It's been a 3-year work in progress. So it is currently dirt because I'm like starting over. I'm like, we're starting from scratch. We're just going to let it die again. And we're going to start again. So.
Yeah. And I mean, it's interesting because I had one student, I don't know if you remember, Matt, but that was one of his senior projects was to test the lettuce in the container versus lettuce that you would buy at the store. And ours is a little bit smaller, but the color is much better and the nutrient content is much better. So it's actually a little bit more nutritious than what you would buy at the store and much fresher.
It seems like there's a lot of companies that have popped up since I was even in college. I think we were, 7 years ago, I guess it was, when that started. Definitely on the front end of this movement of sorts. I know it's been going on for a while, but it seems like it's definitely come into the limelight a lot more over the past 5 years. lots of bigger organizations like Amplified Ag coming in and buying up potentially, I guess, smaller companies that are in this space. I even at one point presented to you and we kind of talked through a container model of sorts that might work at a larger scale. This has been a while now, but I came from a business background to come to work with you all within the Sustainability Club and loved every bit of it. I guess first question, are you all still bringing in other majors into the Sustainability Club too?
Yeah, I mean, we've had interesting for a while. It was mostly band company.
Okay.
It seemed to be a project that particular company took on for a good 2 years.
Well, band company was a little more intelligent, and so that would make a bit more sense.
I mean,
it's just the truth. Just is what it is.
But yeah, I mean, we've had several business majors. Biology is a natural connection. Our current president is psychology and intelligence major with a minor in cybersecurity.
Okay.
So it kind of attracts a lot of different people for a lot of different reasons, but there's something for everyone because it crosses so many different boundaries.
Right.
So it's an interesting project for just about anyone on campus, and they've expanded it in different ways. So we had an engineering professor that was really interested in the water and water quality. So he took over the empty container beside it and turned it into his lab for a little while, right before COVID. So there's a massive tank on the back that floated away during one of the storms. And things like that. So there's lots of different aspects to it that can potentially be explored. So we've done some of that each semester, where each set of students has a different thing that they're interested in. We had one group that was really interested in just preserving the earth. So they did a lot of beach cleanups while they were running the Sustainability Club, and actually won some awards from the South Carolina South Carolina Aquarium. They took second place for the most trash picked up by any group in South Carolina.
Love that.
Yep.
Love that. Do you see as kind of the future of this program, like on campus? I guess where do you see the program on campus going? And then as a follow-up to that, where do you see the future of like agriculture going? Do you see all agriculture going in this direction? Do you see it being split? Do you see it being just a percentage of it? What does that look like for you on the horizon?
Yeah, I mean, on campus, I think it's an interesting thing to have. It's always interesting when new people find out about it, especially in December when we invite faculty and staff into the container. We always get lots of questions. We try to have the cadets there to answer those questions, so it's not just me. Right. But it's always interesting to hear their perspective, and those that have been before and come back, they're like, this was really good. You need to make sure that you grow more of this, and I want more of this, and I've already decided to make this because you have this. So the tailor shop always gets collards. We have, several trays of collards just for them. Lots of basil. A lot of people like to make pesto in December from the basil. Lots of Italian dishes. But it's interesting because the neat thing about the plants is that you pull them out and they still grow. So they can take them home, plant them, and keep growing them in soil, and they grow just fine. But I mean, as far as agriculture as a whole, it's going to have to change. It's already started to change in a lot of different ways. Agriculture takes up the majority of the water that the earth uses, and it wastes most of it. So it's not an efficient use of water, which is kind of how the container idea came about. Super efficient in water, not so efficient in electricity. They still haven't sent me a bill, which is okay.
We can edit that piece out of the podcast too, just so we don't remind them.
I mean, but I mean, it's fascinating how much water gets wasted on agriculture just from runoff and just from things that aren't efficiently watered. So with our limited fresh water and our massively continuously growing population, it has to change. And it's changing in pockets and it's changing in bits and pieces. But I mean, as we've discussed already, there are a lot of things that you can't grow in a container.
Yeah.
And it's just real estate wise, it's really fascinating. So Tiger Corner Farms has actually completely changed the way the containers look on the inside.
Okay.
So they don't have the panels. They don't do any aeroponics anymore. It's strictly hydroponics. So each side is several trays
Okay.
of a hydroponic system because they found it much more efficient than aeroponic, which is part of the reason we've discussed getting a new container.
Yeah, more efficient in regards to the space that it covers and the amount that they can grow, or the speed at which they
Yes.
can grow.
I mean, the speed doesn't really change.
Okay.
Hydroponic, aeroponic speeds it up a little bit,
Yep.
just because it's a constant system.
Right.
So that germination rate is much more consistent, and you're not having to worry about days where it's not as sunny or you don't get as much rain. So the germination rate is extremely consistent, but the growth rate, or I don't remember what you call it, but the number of plants that you get for the number of seeds that you plant,
Right.
is much better using the hydroponic system. I think they're over 90% from seed to plant, which is phenomenal.
Right. I'd say so from a mass scale too. I've seen a lot of the videos, a lot of the companies I've researched are doing it like that too. Massive facilities with all hydroponics. I haven't seen really any massive facilities that do aeroponics at all. So I guess that does make sense. I'd be curious to know if in the future aeroponics makes sense if we have robots picking everything, but and if they were to scale up walls to a certain degree. But it seems like that, from what you're saying, obviously hydroponics just makes a lot more sense right now.
Well, the cleaning is really hard.
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember that.
I do. I remember pulling the panels out and having to clean them outside and then bringing them back in and thinking maybe we didn't clean them enough. And so hopefully we didn't bring anything with us into the container either. Right. So how are they, how does cleaning maybe differ with the hydroponics?
It's much easier because it's just the shelves. So they actually run an acid solution through the shelves in between the grow cycles, which again is much more efficient. And then they don't have to take, the pressure washer and spray everything out and try to get all the nooks and crannies. So it works really well.
Good to know. Good to know. I grew, well, I'm blanking on it now. I've attempted to grow tomatoes over the past 3 years, and I failed miserably every single time. The first 2 times I realized I planted them on the side of the house where the soil content was just not great. It does get salt water from time to time, and so that salt water mixed in did not improve the quality of my tomatoes growth at all. And this last time I did actually grow them properly, but I grew them too late in the season. So it's amazing how all that'll affect the growth cycle of plants, which once again, I don't grow much at all. But I also, prior to that, grew microgreens for a couple of years in the garage. And I was trying to get like my hydroponics and aeroponics like fixed by growing microgreens. I was like, I've got to grow something. And I did that experience too. I learned how to grow microgreens, loved every bit of it, thought about actually selling them, but realized I'd need to be growing a lot more microgreens to make any kind of profit. So I'm curious on the business side too, what you've maybe seen to work well for people that you've talked to, because obviously you need massive scale in order for it to be very profitable. It can be profitable at a smaller scale, but in order for it to really make business sense. So I guess that's why these larger institutions and organizations are buying up the Tiger Corner farms and turning them into larger facilities to make the margins make sense. Is that pretty much in line?
Yeah, I mean, so for Tiger Corner Farms, they just have like 3 different separate businesses under Amplified Ag. So Tiger Corner Farms, I think, is the one that makes the farms. Vertical Roots is the farm that grows the greens, and then I think they have a third one that's underneath it. So they didn't get bought out per se, but they have a
under that umbrella.
Got it. But it's interesting how they kind of diversify their portfolio in that they have a restaurant on Daniel Island where they have 3 or 4 containers that are right outside the restaurant, and those containers feed that restaurant. So it's a really nice system for that specific restaurant.
Right.
But in order to, so they had a contract one year with Dorchester District 2 schools, and needed a massive facility to be able to feed the, I think, 30,000 students in DD2.
Yep.
But it's for us, it's really hard to be that consistent because we don't have full-time employees or even part-time employees,
Right.
that are consistently monitoring all of that. Not that it takes a ton of time to do a lot of that just at those specific spurts, but it takes somebody consistently thinking about it to be able to plan that out.
Right.
But I mean, other businesses that we've talked to have had rooftop gardens. So Harold's Cabin, before they closed, had their own rooftop garden and would kind of plan their menu around their rooftop garden. So smaller scale works if you try to do anything beyond a single vendor. The logistics, as you know, get really complicated really fast.
Right.
And for us at the Citadel, we're changing our food vendor again, July 1st. So
A third time in 6 years?
Yep. So when you were there, I think we switched from Aramark to Sodexo. Now Sodexo's out, and I forget who the new vendor is, but it's not either one of those.
Was it Cisco at one point too, though?
No, those have been the 2 since I've been there.
Okay.
It started off as Aramark, then we went to Sodexo, and then I know she told me what the new one is, but I don't remember off the top of my head. But I mean, we also changed a lot of other personnel that were involved in our discussions with trying to supply the mess hall with greens.
Well, just higher quality food in general.
Right. We can have that type of discussion later.
Oh man, those are great stories from the mess hall. Yeah, I think I actually met you. I met you at an event on campus, but I think I was most interested in the conversation because of our frustration with the mess hall. I was like,
Sure.
what are we eating on a daily basis? What are we putting in our system? And I think this is a conversation that I still have to this day with things we pick up at the grocery store. What are we actually getting? And once again, there are now a lot of companies that are going the hydroponic vertical roots, or aeroponics route. So you can pick them up at your local grocery store. They just happen to be a bit more expensive, but
Sure.
they are much more nutrient dense at the end of the day. And I did want to dispel that to those friends of mine that have said that too, that, hey, this was made in a lab or grown in a lab. Well, kind of. It was grown in a shipping container. Yes, kind of like a lab, but it's all real nutrients. It's not fake.
Right.
And I think a lot of that's been difficult for people to get past, especially after COVID, where you're like, okay, there's that conversation. Now we're growing food in a lab, and now I'm hesitant about eating food from a lab. But so I think there's, once again, a larger conversation to have on that front. Right. So that people know where they're getting it from. It's not lab-grown salmon. It's lab-grown lettuce. It's very real. So
Right. Yeah. I mean, all the seeds that we buy are organic seeds that are specifically identified for being able to grow well in hydroponics. So they're not genetically modified seeds in any way, shape, or form. The only thing that may be done to them, like the lettuce seeds, are the size of your eyelash. So they add like clay around them, like organic clay, so that you can actually pick up the seed instead of trying to, figure out how to plant eyelashes.
yeah, pretty much.
Because that just doesn't work, right?
Right.
So Johnny's Seeds is absolutely amazing. It's where we get all of our seeds from. They're a very dependable source. And again, we purchase specifically organic seeds, pay a little bit extra for them, to make sure that our starting product means we have a really good end product. But I mean, as you said, unfortunately, those things that are most healthy for us tend to be the things that are most expensive in the grocery store. And with rising prices of everything, it tends to be where people first cut when they are making those decisions.
Right. Gotta love inflation. Gotta love inflation.
Yep.
So On the education side of things and your current role as the director of STEM, correct? What are some of your major projects right now? As we started this call earlier, I was not recording yet, but we started talking about some of the things you're doing with in the Low Country, in the state. We talked a little bit about AI. What are some of the major projects that you all are working on campus, but also around the state to help with bringing more attention to students and STEM?
Sure. So South Carolina was the first state in the United States to require computer science as a graduation requirement. So we've been working very closely with the State Department of Education, and actually nationally with code.org and several other entities to make sure that South Carolina students are at the forefront or even ahead of the curve as far as technology and computer science. So we've been working hard to make sure that they have teachers in their classroom that know about computer science. So we've trained, I'd say, close to 1,000 teachers in the last 4 years. We have about 230 coming in just under 3 weeks.
Great. Great.
So that's been a great collaboration with a lot of national organizations to make that happen. And then we have several grants from the National Science Foundation to help elementary teachers to kind of make sure that there's a pathway from elementary to high school, so that students have every opportunity and every student has an opportunity to learn computer science and STEM. And yeah, just trying to help education, particularly in STEM areas across the state in every way we possibly can.
I love it. There's so during I guess it started about 4 years ago. I worked with some charter schools. Worked with a charter school in particular, helping them with some of their marketing and their online presence. And in that process, COVID occurred, and we had to get computers and internet access to a lot of those students that actually didn't have it. One thing I didn't realize about our state is that this was COVID years, a large number of people live in our population do not actually have access to internet. And that was wild to me. And it's one of those things that kind of hits you, hits home literally when you realize that people in your state next door to you might not have access to internet and the same things that you do to be able to access certain programs, to be able to go online and access Google and search certain things. So are there any programs that you all are currently working on to provide maybe at-risk students or students in certain areas with that kind of access so they can get involved in STEM? Because I know that number has definitely gotten a lot smaller since COVID and people have finally realized it. But what are maybe some changes or things that y'all are doing around the state in that regard?
Yeah, I mean, that's an infrastructure issue that really has been addressed. In 2018, I was asked by the Department of Administration to write a report around digital learning. And I got to provide several lovely graphs showing exactly what you talked about. Because, since the early 2000s, the National Department of Education has been trying to suggest to schools how much bandwidth they need, what speeds they need to be, successful for students. And our schools were not there in any way, shape, or form. So even if they have access to the internet, some are at dial-up speeds, which is, again, fascinating. But a lot of the work that we've done, mostly because we can't necessarily impact the infrastructure in that way, is to help students with those basic computational thinking skills that don't necessarily need the computer. So a lot of the work that we do is actually through children's read-alouds. Okay. So children's books and helping them to pick out problem-solving skills, pattern recognition skills, things like that from those books as a basis. So taking something that they're already familiar with and adding those layers that they're already kind of doing, but really solidifying those skills as early as possible so that they're better prepared when they do get to those classes at school, when they're logging onto a computer and jumping onto code.org's platform or somebody else's platform to do programming, right. Which has been fascinating. So my colleague's second grader has announced that he is done with Scratch Junior, He has seen it 3 years in a row now, and he will not use it again. He is far more sophisticated than that. He is ready to code in a much different way.
That's very impressive.
It's very impressive, right? But that's what we're trying to make sure that we're prepared for, because we're kind of working at both ends, so that those elementary students have those base skills that they need to get to those more advanced classes, but also making sure that by the time they get to middle school and high school, there are enough teachers in those classrooms teaching those advanced classes that they don't get stuck.
Right.
Because right now they have to take a class, which means every high school has to offer a class. But if a student's passionate about it, that's not helpful.
Are you seeing a lot of, so in the college space, I'm sure a lot of colleges bring in like adjunct professors to come in and help teach a lot of these skill sets that might not be able to be taught internally by professors that are currently teaching there. Is there some of that happening in high schools as well, where people will come in to teach and support certain classes for those students?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm not going to expand on that.
Okay, wonderful. Glad to hear it. That's great.
I played the fifth on that one.
Making progress. I love to hear that. Okay, great. Next topic. You mentioned AI earlier a little bit. I've become a huge fan of utilizing tools like ChatGPT, and there's obviously a million different AI tools now on the market. Obviously, every single platform is using. I've got gnats. Sorry, they're all around me right now. But they're being used in every single tool pretty much we use on a daily basis. Zoom has AI features. Canva has AI features that I use for designing anything on a daily basis. ChatGPT, which is obviously incredible, and they just keep getting better. And they've also put a lot of AI companies out of business because they continue to evolve so rapidly. So thank you, OpenAI, for that, and others that are competing. What has been, though, in kind of from your experience, the biggest learning curve with AI in education and students using AI? Because I know if I were in high school or college again, I would be using AI for everything. And I wouldn't want to use it to cheat, but just frankly, it makes life 10 times easier. It speeds up the process. I can learn a lot faster. I can get things done, and I can evolve my thinking with the usage of AI. That's my personal stance on it. Right. Curious to know yours.
I agree 100%. So schools tend to react to things and just say no. If they don't understand it or don't want it, they just say, no, we're not using it. That's not possible. AI, as you said, is in everything. You can't even Google something now without getting AI generated suggestions.
Right.
So even the most basic Google search feature has AI, which some of those responses, I don't know if you've seen them, are hilarious.
They're hysterical. Weren't they trained on Reddit? Wasn't there something recently? They trained some kind of bot on Reddit, and its responses were hysterical. I mean, terrible, but hysterical.
Right. So we've taken two tacks. One is making sure that everyone understands how those AIs are working. So in my classes, they have to read through 2 documents before they're allowed to open up any modules, because primarily I teach distance learning. So they have to verify that they understand how AI works, that it's not intelligent at all, and is basically just throwing words together in a pattern that it thinks, and it doesn't even think that somebody suggested makes sense, right? And to understand the biases in those responses, right? So that's a conversation that we have quite a bit. We were at a conference in Philadelphia, and they had 2 poster sessions around basically justice and AI. And one of the presenters was saying that the thing that activates the sink when you wash your hands, or the paper towel sensor, because of the color of her hand, it doesn't activate. So she said she naturally now, unfortunately, grabs a paper towel that's a lighter color than what her skin is and waves it in front of the sink to activate the sink.
Huh. That's not great.
Right. Unfortunately, we live world where somebody has to do that.
Right.
So really, really trying to help users of AI understand where it comes from,
Mm-hmm.
and what it is capable of and why, and what it's not capable of.
So that's an interesting case of like a built-in bias into the AI model. But wow, I haven't really thought about that one at all.
Once you go down that rabbit hole, it gets really scary real fast.
Real fast. Real fast.
Real fast. Yep.
Wow.
So MIT is doing a lot of work around like elementary AI. They call it everyday AI.
Right.
And they've got some really great lessons. They also have Day of AI. And again, really great lessons. Their PowerPoints are online. And it goes into a lot of those biases and things. And you start talking about deep fakes and social media and things like that. And especially like teenagers, like my teenagers, need to understand that before they start diving into those tools.
Right.
So most AI isn't supposed to be accessible to students under 13. We've known for years that doesn't work. But my 7th grader, we've worked on prompt generation because she wanted to write an email to her teacher. So we told ChatGPT to write an email to this person on this topic as a 7th grader.
Right.
So, basic things like that are becoming important skills.
I bet this does it really interesting though for like English majors and anybody that is required. I mean, we're required to write on a daily basis, and I totally understand the importance of being able to write for a number of reasons. But I'd be curious to know how maybe other people in school settings are working towards students utilizing these tools, but not using them for full creation and for the creativity aspect.
Right. So, I mean, a lot of education has been focused on AI detectors.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, AI detectors are extremely biased towards English language learners.
Right.
So I actually had an issue where an adjunct was saying a student cheated on an assignment because it didn't read like they thought the student should write, and they were convinced that it was AI. Well, did you have any sort of checker or anything? Like a lot of our tools have built-in checkers, not for AI detection, but for, cheating. That Turnitin, I think, is the one that we use. So, I mean, I told him unless he had proof, there was no way he could, charge the student with cheating.
Right.
But unfortunately, those are the conversations that are being had versus how can we use it effectively to, as you said, kind of bypass those beginning stages and really focus in on those creative stages or the advanced thinking stages,
Right.
critical thinking stages, because it's great for that.
Right.
So we've advised our students to use it as a thought partner. Not to copy and paste what it spits out, but to take what it spits out and to revise and submit it as a revised version, an improved version from what it started you at.
Love it. So teaching students to become prompt engineers in every aspect.
Yeah, I mean, right now, prompt engineers, but it won't be long where they don't even necessarily need to do that piece.
Right. Right. The future of AI. So as it relates to AGI, have you put any thought into that? I'm sure you have, but would love to know your thoughts.
The coming wave?
Not yet, but I need to.
Yeah. If you haven't read it, it's terrifying.
On the reading list.
Really, really good book. The other one I read recently was The Atlas of AI. Okay. And that one is a little bit more centered around the beginnings of AI and kind of where AI has come from, which is also really interesting but terrifying. It's amazing what is not being said and shared about AI. But I forgot your question. I'm sorry.
What was the Atlas of AI or the coming wave? which one was not more scary, but more of a harbinger of what's to come?
The coming wave is really about how quickly we'll get.
You were talking about the coming wave.
Yes. So the coming wave is really the one that's talking about the coming of AGI, and how quickly it will get here. Which, I mean, if I remember correctly, and it's been a little while since I've read it, I think the prediction was maybe less than 10 years, which is a little scary. But I mean, we're not prepared for the current evolution. I don't know how we're going to prepare for that.
When you say we, are you referring to education or we as in civilization?
All the above.
Okay.
So civilization, definitely. Education is usually way behind everything else.
Right. Right. Wow. Yeah, there's a lot of questions on AI, and I think we could go into a completely different podcast to have that conversation. So I won't dive deep down that rabbit hole necessarily, but certainly interesting to know that you're working a lot in that area right now, and I think there needs to be a lot more people in education working on it. I've had very interesting conversations on both sides with certain people in education who are against the use of AI altogether because of the fact that it's like cheating, and if you're utilizing it, you're basically cheating. The other side of it is very much up your alley of the utilization of it is inevitable. And even from like an entrepreneurial perspective, we need to be using these tools to create new solutions. And if we have access to them, we might as well use them for good. There will always be the usage for bad, of course, there always is, but we might as well use these tools for the creation of good and the help of people and the civilization and progress us as a society as best as we possibly can. And we might as well work on attacking the unconscious and the biases that are created as we move along. But those are just the unfortunate effects of creating things quickly and at the rapid rate in which things are being created. It's inevitable. But it's to your point earlier about the waving of a different colored hand over a sensor. It's a great example, and I don't think I even considered that one. So I appreciate you putting that in my mind. One more thing to think about before I go to bed tonight, as I'm thinking about all the scary things happening in this world. But no, very exciting creations in the AI space, just in general. Outside of that, is there anything else that you're maybe working on, or maybe want to share that might be good to like bring to light for the few people that we have listening to this podcast in these early days?
Not that I can think of. I mean, really, that's kind of where most of our time is spent right now.
Okay.
Making sure teachers have an understanding of computer science and AI. We have a cybersecurity camp for students. Our STEAM camp that starts on Monday is artificial intelligence. So that'll be super fun to work with middle schoolers. One of their classes is all around ethics because we couldn't do AI without classes in ethics, because those have to go hand in hand. There are 13 states now that actually have guidelines for schools around AI. South Carolina is not one of them.
Is it in the works?
Nope. But South Carolina has kind of sort of joined Teach AI, which is an initiative of code.org to work with schools and teachers around AI. So we are kind of sort of part of that initiative. But as far as guidelines, I don't see those coming from South Carolina anytime soon. North Carolina, I think, was the 5th state to release some.
Are all states pretty different in regards to their guidelines? Or are they all kind of starting to follow the same flow?
I mean, there's similar elements, and that's partially because a lot of them are leveraging kind of the same tools. AI in education and Teach AI are probably the two most prominent entities around education and AI right now, and have those sorts of guidelines that teachers and schools and districts and states can kind of pick up and run with. But I mean, even the EU has done a much better job than we have of trying to get out in front of that, which has also been really fascinating. But I mean, the White House has been releasing things on almost a daily basis around different areas of AI. So I hope we'll catch up.
Hopefully.
Hopefully.
Um,
But I mean, and interestingly enough, uh, our governor has some really interesting irons in the fire. So one of them is around electric vehicles, and the Biden administration just announced $1.3 billion towards more charging stations for electric vehicles. And then the other one that's interesting is SC Quantum. So trying to prepare South Carolina to be on the forefront of quantum as well. So there are definitely efforts to make sure that South Carolina is not left behind and maybe even towards the forefront of some of these emerging technologies. So it's interesting times.
you mentioned electronic vehicles and charging stations too. Just to hit on that one real quick. So obviously electric vehicles are growing in abundance in our country, and we will continue to have more and more and more of them. What are your thoughts on hydrogen vehicles and the usage of hydrogen in our vehicles just in general? Do you think it will grow as a sector at the same rate as electric, outpace, keep with?
I think there are too many variables right now to predict that. There's what's good for the environment and what's good for the bottom line, and those two things don't necessarily correlate. So yes.
Understood. I've had a lot of people have that conversation with me as of late too, as it relates to the growth of hydrogen just in general in our vehicles. It seems like, just from my perspective, that environmentally speaking, electric vehicles still do have a lot of negative impact as it relates to the materials that we're using in our electric vehicles. And at the end of the day, we're still using fossil fuels in a lot of ways to power stations and to do other things. So that all just seems a little bit contradicting in my mind. Maybe that's just me. So I'd like to think there's a better solution at the end of the day than just continuing to grow into the electric vehicle phase. Maybe there's something better that we can introduce faster, sort of thing. But it would be nice. It would be nice and kind of utopian. But one can dream. One can dream. Once again, I really appreciate the time tonight. I've also got people outside doing a bunch of yard work, and so as I'm hearing that, I'm like, maybe this is a sign that it's time to hop off and go eat dinner. But really appreciate you coming on tonight and joining the show, and look forward to getting this out to everybody to share more about hydroponics, aeroponics, education, all the wonderful things that y'all are doing in the state of South Carolina.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, I'm going to